My name is Marco Passalia. It's strange for me this time to be here as moderator. It's interesting, actually. I'm an entrepreneur active in the natural gas business. I'm also a Swiss politician. You know that in Switzerland we can be both, let's say, politician as a hobby, but on the same time professionals in different sectors. And I'm also the Secretary General of Lugano Commodity Trading Association. That's the reason why I'm also here. I'm really collaborating with Caspian Week, with Murat, with Shirin, and with all the staff. And I want to really thank all of them for organizing this very interesting week. So, I think that it's interesting to avoid to have kind of presentation, PowerPoint presentation or whatever. I would like to have a dynamic discussion, also a little bit kind of familiar, I would say, chat. I want really our speakers to be also a little bit interactive. And that's what we are trying to do. If you have questions, I will try also to filter some questions depending on the topic, if we are finishing the topic or not. And I will try also to be very familiar. I would try to avoid titles and so on. You know, in Europe sometimes we also like titles, in Switzerland, in Italy, but we are in a familiar area, sitting on our comfortable sofa. So I divided this discussion into 4 parts, and I would like to start with what all of you already know. I mean, what is happening all around the world, kind of trade tensions. We all read about that. We all experienced that in also different business or governmental experiences and where you are active. And we really read a lot about trade war, about tariff war. And the idea is really to understand a little bit more what's happening. And I think that for that, Daniel, I think that you can start supporting us in doing. Daniel, as you could read, is a partner on King and Spalding in Geneva, Switzerland. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers. It's always good to get together in Davos to talk about ideas. So that's what Caspian Week has put together, is the discussion of ideas. And I'm going to start with an observation that I got walking down the street about 15 minutes ago. And whenever you're in Davos, you mention Klaus Schwab. And everybody should be quiet, right?
We'll try to do that.
But the quote on one of the windows was, "Let's give our global architecture an update so we can shape globalization 4.0. That's Klaus Schwab, what he wants from this. So that's part of what we're doing here. And so my big idea, as far as the technical reasons behind this dispute, there's one thing we have to mention in the context of the dispute. It's that we talk about a trade war. But trade wars come about for the same reasons as regular military wars. When countries have a real or perceived breakdown in 2 things: mutually advantageous outcomes and enforceable agreements, in situations where the potential gains of war outweigh the losses. So we have some countries who think that the potential, that there is no mutual advantage anymore. Unfair, you hear always from Washington, unfair, worst agreement ever entered into. So now we have an observation that the global trading system, the architecture that Klaus Schwab and everybody else talks about, needs to be updated because we need to avoid all kinds of wars by ensuring mutually advantageous and enforceable rules. So technically speaking, the WTO is a contract. And all business people in this room can understand what a contract is. And the contract at the WTO is an agreement to open markets in exchange for access to other people's markets. And according to economic theory, even if you lose some jobs, the bilateral exchange of trade is mutually advantageous, as long as it's enforceable. So those countries, like in most contracts, in business contracts, countries agree to subject their actions to dispute settlement. So my observation for today is that technically and really, we have a situation where both the mutual advantages of the WTO contract and the viability of enforcement have been called into question. And whether that's real or perceived is something we need to talk about. But it's a real problem because that leads to wars, in this sense, trade war. So from the perspective, this is not my view, I'm giving you an observation from the US perspective that the current regime in Washington thinks that there's a non-reciprocal and unfair trade-related competition from China and other countries where WTO members are harming US interests. So the United States is acting to preserve its interests in a state of war, meaning its advantages in conducting this war outweigh the disadvantages. So I would say that for export interests, there are two aspects of that, export and import. In export interests, US companies, and I think if you meet them all here, if you ask them, did the WTO turn out to be everything it was intended to be? They'll tell you no. They don't think they can enforce trade law outside. They don't think it advances their business interests, whether it's agriculture or technology. These rules were written before the internet. And all we're talking here about technology, it doesn't cover the reality of the current trade. And so for the domestic side, WTO rulings are seen to infringe upon the agreed protection against U.S. industrial interests that protect against unfair trade. So we have unfair, lack of enforcement, lack of modern system. So Klaus Schwab's statement that we need to update the infrastructure is absolutely on point. So finally, the WTO membership is unable to address many of these long-standing issues because they can't negotiate, basically since 1995. And so we have all these new issues and all these problems, and the WTO is not in a position to negotiate. So the United States has resorted to what it calls self-help, last point. It's breaking the rules to address a situation that it perceives to be unfair. So I leave you with one question. If you're a business and you enter into a contract, would you go to war against your business partner, all your business partners, because of an issue, or would you try to rebuild that system that allows you to conduct business? So I'll leave you with that. There is a war going on, and we all need to figure out why and what's the way out. So I leave that to all the other panel.
Thanks. Dan, I think that the question is actually for you, because two main actors that were mentioned in what Daniel just said are on the one side United States, on the other side China, and I think it's interesting to start from these two countries. And so maybe let's start also with a clear reply to Daniel.
Okay. Me?
Yes, please, Dan.
Okay. Well, I'm not a policy person. I'm a practitioner of trade. So I worry about different things than many other people do. The inefficiency of trade, the roadblocks in trade, the way trade has not endorsed technology and that sort of thing. As to the WTO, I had a law professor once that taught contracts, and he said every contract is in fact an option. You have an option to honor it, or you have an option to breach it. The option to breach is always there. Of course, there are consequences. The problems in international relations, particularly the WTO, is there may not be consequences for breaching it, and if there are consequences, you don't really know what they are. That's got to be worked out particularly. In the Netherlands in which I work, the actual process of trade, we have so many more problems than worrying about the WTO that we leave that to higher minds than our own, for the most part, although we do have opinions. I personally think that we are in need for revision of all international institutions. You know, when we started this whole thing out, the idea was countries were sovereign, they wouldn't give up sovereignty, everyone wanted some sort of international governance beyond just the contract, the handshake. The League of Nations was one of those, the UN was one of those, the WTO. none of those are really working as intended, and none of them are very efficient in the way that they ought to be. So I think there would be a need to revise literally all of them. Of course, with so many nations these days, you can't just say, I'm going to revise it. Let's call a good lawyer like Daniel and get him to do a draft, and we'll all agree to the draft. It's not like normal business. I think the WTO will probably hang around till I'm long gone in some form or other, but not in its current form. And I expect that during the transition phase, there's going to be a lot of dislocation, a lot of happiness with a lot of people, and a lot of countries that feel they've been victimized by the lack of progress.
Thanks, Dan. I think that we are going also later to talk about the evolution of WTO. That's very important. Mr. Ho, maybe it's also interesting to listen to the Chinese point of view on what's happening, because frankly speaking, we in this part of the world, in Europe, western part of the world, we read some articles, some information. It's interesting also to listen to your points of view on the trade wars.
好的，非常感谢主持人的提问。那么，我想我今天是一个非常特殊的一个嘉宾，坐在这个舞台上。因为我还不会讲英文，所以我只能讲中文。由我的好朋友来，这个卓总呢来帮助我来说英文。但是我相信我会努力，会争取我明年来参加这个里海州的时候，一定就可以用英文跟大家交流。
I'm very happy to participate in this panel discussion. I apologize being to exchange with other panelists in English, and my friend myself will help out. Yeah.
No, я хорошо говорю по-русски. 这样，关于主持人这个问题，中美贸易战，我想很显然，它是在这个中国是引起了高度的关注。可以讲，我们在大街上随便如果问10个人的话，会有10个人知道现在关于中美贸易战。
The trade conflict between China and America is a big issue for the Chinese nation as well, and even anyone on the street, if you just survey around, then everybody is concerned, everybody is interested in the subject.
因为在中国，无论是从官员到专家学者，再到我们市场的这个卖菜的大妈，其实都是知道中美贸易战。
So in China, from the senior government officials down all the way to street merchants of vegetables, everybody is aware of this ongoing trade dispute with America. Yeah, everyone feels concerned.
为什么会这样？很显然是因为中美两个国家是两个大国，一个是最大的发达国家，一个是最大的发展中国家。另外，中美两国之间的贸易额现在已经是6000多亿美元，这么庞大的一个贸易额，自然会引起这个中国的和美国的高度关注。对，6000多亿。
So the main reason, in my view, is that America being the biggest developed country and China being the biggest developing country, with bilateral trade annually at $600 billion US, this just the overwhelming impact make the general concern of the population natural consequence.
关于这个问题，我们中国大多数的其实人都是一个共同的观点，就是说这个经贸合作是互利共赢的，合则两利，斗则俱伤。
The majority of the Chinese people would rather believe that the trade is a mutually beneficial exercise. And Mr. Ho quoted old Chinese saying that when cooperation brings mutual benefits, infight brings in mutual harm.
尽管关注的人很多，但现在我们也基本上有一个共识，就是说，这个要正确面对现在中美之间的这个贸易战。那么，大家有一个共性的一个共识，就是中美的关系再也回不到从前了。
The consensus, however, remains that the comprehensive trade relations between America and China has reached such point there is no return. It has crossed no return point. There is no way to go back anymore.
与此同时，我们很多人还是乐观的认为，中美虽然现在贸易战这个在不停的在打，但是呢，终究因为中美两个国家这个贸易额6000多亿美元是变成你中有我，我中有你，那么中美之间的这个关系坏也坏不到哪里去。
There's still a great amount of people who remain confident and optimistic on the eventual solution of the ongoing trade conflict with America. In other words, because of the comprehensive trade relations, how shall I translate? It's like mutually inclusive. So America and China is kind of like inside each other, and so as a result, the likelihood that a complete breakdown of the trade relationship between these two countries is actually a low risk.
所以我们坚信，还最终是通过谈判来解决。包括我们刘鹤副总理也将马上会去美国进行一个贸易谈判。我们坚信，通过贸易最终一定是解决中美贸易战问题的。
We believe that negotiation is the way to go, and just like the Chinese Vice Prime Minister is on his way to America for another round of negotiations with U.S. officials, there will be an issue. That's the consensus.
在这里，我想谈一个观点，就是说中美贸易战没有赢家，对中国也不利，对美国也不利。但是有一个观点，它对第三国是有利的。好。
So just one last point to complete. The ongoing trade war or trade, which like the Chinese rather say, trade conflict with America is mutually harmful for America and China. However, there might be some side benefits for third-party countries.
Very harmful for America, for China, but what's happening in, let's say, in Central Asia, and then also what's happening in Russia. I think that it's very important to have also with that somebody that knows very well WTO, that is also involved in WTO activity, and that's why it's a pleasure to have with us also Zhanar Aitzhanova, ambassador of the Republic of Kazakhstan in Switzerland, and plenipotentiary to WTO.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you for inviting to participate in this interesting panel. Of course, global tensions or trade wars, they are not positive, and they don't have any benefits for countries such as my country, which is, since it gained independence 26 years ago, it has started conducting open investment, economic and trade policy. If we take statistics, last year in 2017, for 11 months, we do have statistics. We had total trade turnover of $85 billion US, and with a positive trade balance of $25 billion US. And of course, we are very much export commodities, and the trade balance also fluctuates in accordance with the international or global prices for major export commodities of my country. And if we take the structure of our exports and total trade, external trade, then our major trading partners are European Union members. 40% of our trade takes place with the European Union members, and another 25% with Russia, its second trading partner, and followed by China. So, of course, for us, if even we don't see in the short run negative implications of all these measures which are being applied by countries in these trade tensions by our major trading partners, we, in the long run, will have negative consequences for our economy. These are our analysis and these are our predictions. And if we take just two major commodities which we export, it's steel and aluminium. And United States has imposed 20% or 25% import duties for steel imports. And this list of countries also include Kazakhstan. But fortunately, our exports to United States, it's between 0 and 1%. And the major of our exports of steel go to Russia, Uzbekistan, and Iran. And with Russia, as you know, we are in the Eurasian Economic Union. We should not have legally any trade barriers. And with Uzbekistan, we have a free trade agreement. We have CIS-wide as well as bilateral free trade agreement with Uzbekistan. And if we take aluminium as a second product for which 10% of import duties were imposed by the United States, then around 7% of our exports go to United States. And the rest, again, goes to Greece, Russia, and Italy, and some other countries. If even in the short and medium term, we don't see the negative implications for our exports as a commodity exports-driven economy, we will be seeing substitutions and overproduction in those countries against whose exports these trade measures are being applied. Therefore, of course, in the long run, our predictions or our prognosis are not the positive ones, and we would better prefer not to have any trade tensions and trade wars.
That's very clear. Negative for Kazakhstan, negative for US, negative for China. But who's winning? I mean, what's
Good
happening?
question.
It's maybe Russia winning because Russia is also under sanctions. What's happening? What's Vladimir? What's your opinion on that?
First remark, maybe I would like. No, thank you. I haven't the mic. I would like to name this U.S.-Chinese not war, but maybe battle. The war could come later. But what is the Russian position? What is the situation in Russia? First of all, we are thinking now much more about Eurasia and about our Eurasian Economic Union. We are busy with that structure, and we see clear future for our union. We don't turn away from the European Union. The Russian trade turnover with the European Union is still very significant. 10 years ago, maybe 60% of our turnover with the European Union, of the whole turnover, belonged to the European Union. And one example, after the war in Caucasus, 2008, involving Georgia, South Ossetia, and Russia, and especially after the events in Ukraine and around Ukraine in 2014, and inventing sanctions first from the West and then as answer Russian sanctions against some European countries and the United States of America. The trade between Russia and Germany, for example, which reached already 70 billion euro in 2014, reduced twice in 2015, in a year. At the same time, Russia started or began really very intensive trade with China, and now we reached the mark over $100 billion in our trade. This is the one tendency. The second, maybe, which I would mention, is that the Western sanctions, or I would say sanctions from the Western community of values, because we talked this morning already about the meeting between Shinzo Abe and Vladimir Putin in Moscow this morning. We will see what it will bring. But Japan also joined these sanctions, for example. Nevertheless, they meet each other and talk about world issues, about mutual issues, and so on. The profit of Russian economy is that now we export agricultural products. The Soviet Union and Russia has been always importer of grain, for example, but now Russia is principally a leader in delivering wheat to the world market.
European point of view, Pietro, I think it's also, we cannot avoid also to talk about Europe, what's happening also in Europe. There are a few troubles, let's say that, and is somehow European Union winning?
Right. I would argue that the European Union is not winning from this war. Let me just say maybe a word or two of introduction here. I think the beauty of this panel, we just really see it, we just saw it in action, is that we have people representing different geographical areas, different parts of the world, and therefore also presenting and sharing with you different opinions. What we've been reading over the past 18 months, roughly 18 months, is, well, a problem, a tension, a war, we can use that word, it's a strong one, but we can probably, between two very large economies, the United States on the one hand and China on the other. And then, of course, as you, Marco, rightly put it, while those two big countries and economies are trading punches instead of goods necessarily, what about the rest of the world? And of course, the European Union is the other big, very big, very large economy and big trading bloc. So I would like to say a few words about that, right? Not a winner. I mean, I think everybody, one way or the other, is a loser out of this, or loses out from this uncertainty, constant and persistent uncertainty. However, when we look at what is happening between now the United States and I would say Europe, I would share maybe the European angle of the story here, is should be divided, should be split in two parts, and those two should not necessarily be mixed, at least not all the time. The political dimension and the trade or the commercial dimension. At the political level, of course, the disagreements, misunderstandings are also a result of to some extent different ideological positions. The U.S. administration, American administration, has showed a certain allergy, I hope we can use that word, to what is international organizations, multilateralism. We'll come back to this when we will discuss the WTO and what is not functioning with the WTO. A certain allergy, a certain mistrust, a certain willingness to push for complete sovereignty. And what does complete sovereignty mean? It means, well, a country should not be subject to any external rule, external law, nor, of course, to any external court. Any court that is not a national, a domestic court, should not, in principle, be accepted or acceptable. I think we'll come back to this. Now, more specifically on the economic and trade dimension of this, well, the decision of the United States to impose tariffs in the forms of safeguards against certain imports from China, specifically steel and aluminum, is something that didn't happen overnight, of course. Before the implementation of the adoption of those measures, statements, certainly talks took place. And it's interesting to note that the European Union supported that view, shared that view, that indeed China was over-supplying the market. There were subsidies, there was a certain unhappiness also from the part of the European Union with the way the Chinese government and the intervention in the economy in China, and the repercussions, therefore, on international trade. So it's not that the European Union did not support that. That is very interesting, and it's sometimes forgotten. The European Union has complained as much as the United States against subsidies and suggested that Beijing opens up its economy. The difference, however, is on on the reaction, on the tools that have then been used. The United States opted for a rather unilateral move through safeguards, justifying those safeguards with national security, whereas the European Union, I think that for now, is trying to talk to China and trying to figure out how to fix the problem. Now, the United States implemented their safeguard measures against those two products, principle, and the European Union, like many other countries that were subject to those measures, retaliated. Okay, so they also applied some additional tariffs to certain imports of U.S. goods. Well, we could really say a lot about that, but I would argue that it was indeed a tit for tat, as they say, right? A retaliation. You did something bad to me, I do something bad to you. And they went on to target, they drafted a list of goods on which to impose tariffs, and they did it in a way that could, in principle, maximize also the political impact. They picked, I think, orange juice from Florida. Florida is an important state when it comes to elections in the United States. They picked some other products from specific states with that intent in mind. But I think that all in all, those measures are in place, of course, but for the rest, we heard that, for instance, the United States looking into the automotive industry. That, of course, would be much more painful, I would argue, for the European Union than steel and aluminium, which for as important as it can be, it represents, I think I have some figures here, roughly between 5 and 6 billion of EU exports into the United States, out of 600 billion of trade in total, which is therefore, I wouldn't say negligible, but quite small. Now, for the time being, both sides refrain from taking any further action, which is of course a good news. I would also like to leave you with a question: how to move forward. We know that both sides are talking, they're meeting on a regular basis. It's not the resumption of the transatlantic trade and investment partnership, which was this huge, massive project. I think they had like 15 or 16 rounds of negotiations from 2013 up to 2016 to somehow make the two sides of the Atlantic even closer when it comes to commerce and trade. But so what to do? And this will, of course, be the first question. And maybe I leave you with another point also.
Not too many questions.
No, it's more for reflection than a point, Marco, is whether, I think it's an interesting one, whether what is happening between the United States and China may bring the European Union closer to China, rather than to its traditional ally, which has been the United States. This is also a very interesting question. There is diplomacy, there is economy, there is politics. It's an interesting mix, but I would like to leave this point with you for now.
I think that I take this question and just straight away asking this to Mr. Ho. Is somehow European Union becoming more, let's say, a more friendly partner? Or also Russia, or also other Central Asian countries?
这就刚才我说的问题，就是说，任何的事情有坏的一面，也一定有好的一面。
As I said earlier, everything has the up and down side.
那么刚才我谈到了，一定有第三方会受益的。我这里边只举一个例子，大家因为时间的关系，我就说，比如说中美贸易战之后啊，我们中国的大豆是从全球进口的，有每一年9500万吨的大豆是从全球进口。
Okay, I will give one example of what I said. The third-party country would potentially benefit from the ongoing trade dispute with America. I will use the example of soybean trade. China is importing.
9500万吨。
It's a 9,500.
95个百万。
95 million tons of soybeans. That is the annual import volume of China.
这其中有3285万吨，就3200万吨是从美国进口的大豆。
Currently, about 32 million tons of soybeans are imported from the U.S. from China, which is about 1/3 of.
那么中美贸易战一打了之后，中国从美国肯定是不会再进口大豆，这种情况下，他就要寻找第三国。
The direct consequence of the current trade dispute with America means that China has literally stopped importing soybeans from the U.S. and has been actively seeking the third-party country replacement.
很显然，对于俄罗斯来说，就有一个机会。原来想进入中国大豆是没有可能的，那么现在可以向中国出口大豆了。
By all means, this represents a great opportunity for Russia, as Russia has been trying to penetrate the Chinese market since a while, and now seems the good time to do that.
欧盟也一样的道理，其实有很多这个原来中美之间的这个贸易都会因为这个市场的一个改变，会给欧盟进入中国提供很多的机会。
Same is true for European Union countries because of the current trade dispute. So a lot of the parameters of the world market has been deeply modified, and this represents opportunities for countries like EU.
Thank you. I think that it's important also to see what happened in the past, because this is the first time that we talk about let's say trade wars, about tariffs, about tensions among countries, and that's a great occasion to do it with Yenkong Hodu, that he just arrived. Sorry, if you want to stand up also, because you have the table here, and maybe just also from a historical point of view, if you can give us an idea about what's happening. That's
Hello, good afternoon. I have to apologize for coming late. My flight arrived late, and getting here wasn't very easy. Yeah, thanks for starting already. I want to also thank the organizer of this session. It's a privilege to be here. Regarding what is happening, in fact, it is unprecedented at many levels. One being that we have never had a situation like this. The other one being that, in fact, it's not new. I mean, we've had this in history. And we need to go back a couple of centuries ago to trace when the issue of unilateralism and retaliation countermeasures actually happened. The first one was the Anglo-Dutch War, during the Anglo-Dutch War, when the England and the Netherlands were struggling for dominance in merchandise trade. And that was in the 17th century. We had 4 Anglo-Dutch War, and it started just with tariffs and retaliation, unilateralism and retaliation. And now we come back again, which our Chinese counterpart we know well, the Opium War between the United Kingdom and China, which also started as a trade dispute. It was civil and finally led to a violent conflict. And we also had another situation, which is actually a bit more recent in the sense that is in the 20th century. We know what happened in the 1930s. That's the 1930 Act, when the Republican Party in the Congress, they passed they decided to issue the 1930 Act, and President Hoover reluctantly signed the act, agreed to the act. That one really contributed to the Great Depression and eventually to the Second World War that we witnessed. So this is, from that perspective, this is not something really new. But I think the alarming thing here is that we are dealing with a situation where if it were to be like those ones were, in the sense of leading to violent conflict, I think we're just talking about wiping out of mankind, because in those days, the weaponry that were used in wars were primitive weaponry, and we cannot afford that that this time around with nuclear power. So the hope is that this will resolve. There will be a solution in the end, that the parties will come back together and find a way to resolve the trade disputes together. It is true that the World Trade Organization is not perfect, but I think the worst thing we want to do is to actually destroy the system altogether. The way that the WTO was negotiated in the 90s, I think it was negotiated during a very challenging moment, and we'll all agree that. But I think what countries need to do now is to reinvigorate the spirit of multilateralism, to come to the negotiation.
You're already getting to next question.
Yeah, okay. So in that case, I stop here and in the next session. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
I hope by the end of this we'll have solutions.
We will get back to that in a few minutes, and it's interesting to also realize that it's happening something opposite in comparison with what happened in the international community related to WTO, to United Nations, and so on. A lot of investment in facilitating trade, in really creating a very flexible, very liberal market. But something different is happening these last 2-3 years. So, Jan, what do you think? Where do we stand?
Good, very good question. Is this on? Yeah. No, to answer the question, we are exactly 50% there. Now, question to the audience, 50%, is this half full or half empty, the glass? The good thing is it is filling up. So I actually, after the first round here, I'm coming in with a more positive note. 50% is really, it's an exact number. Just 10 days ago, we got the latest photo of the notification that the WTO of the trade facilitation agreement. So to what extent have countries notified, implemented specific measures? Each country commits to 12 articles, 37 measures. Do I have or do I not have advanced ruling, pre-arrival processing, single window, transit regime, automated payment, whatever. So I calculated how many countries, some countries have notified 100%, Korea, Singapore, 100%. Some have notified 3-4%. Some have not yet notified. So I added it up and said, wow, it's exactly 50% that is notified. But the good news is it is filling up. I did want to come in here with one, make it interactive. With all making it interactive, I would disagree with the idea that there are others who benefit. Yes, there may be ad hoc cases that other countries export soybeans, but overall at UNCTAD we did analyze that if China and the US trade less with each other, you also buy less from other countries. China imports a lot of intermediate products from other Southeast Asian countries, raw materials. So if you export less to the United States, you will also import less from other countries. And we calculated that African countries in particular are also suffering from this. So there is something in the bad news still, but the good news is the WTO has shown it can come to an agreement. I think the WTO Bali agreement, again, some people said, oh, it is only trade facilitation. Well, but it is a working agreement. It is being implemented. Our main challenge there currently is the challenge of the chicken and the egg. If I do not modernize, invest in trade station, transport, logistics, which is also of interest here, then of course I'm less competitive. And if I'm less competitive, I trade less, and I have less money and less capacity to invest. So we have a very clear correlation between the development of a country and its trade efficiency. No surprises here. The least developed you are Haiti, you are Burundi, you are Comoros, you are much less efficient. Well, if you are less efficient, you also become you trade less. No? There are other indicators that are closely correlated. The corruption perception index. The more corrupt you are, on average, the less you are able or maybe willing to modernize and invest in trade station. But again, a short intervention here. Maybe later on we come on to technologies, this type of thing, which I think is also a positive story. But overall, we are exactly 50% there today, and it's filling up.
Stop just a second before getting into our next points, a little bit understanding what's happening. WTO, is that still actual or not? Because I'm asking if you ever heard about Asgardia? Have you ever heard about Asgardia? Raise your hands.
I'm sorry, what is Asgardia?
Don't raise your hand. That's a good question. So, to understand a little bit more about Asgardia, we will have here with us a guest. Please. So I was looking for you. Thanks. Please. Maybe stand here.
Now we know.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ruslan Ashurbeli, and I'm special representative of the head of nation, Dr. Igor Ashurbeli. I'm happy to welcome you on behalf of the space nation Asgardia. Asgardia is the first space nation in humanity's history, created at the end of 2016. The population of Asgardia as of today exceeds 1 million Earthlings, who reside in more than 200 countries all over the globe. Asgardia's motto is One Humanity, One Unity. Asgardia's main mission is the birth of the first human in space. Such an event will be symbolic of humanity's eternal existence. To reach this goal, we must solve three main problems. First one is to achieve recognition of Asgardia as a full-fledged independent nation. Second, to solve the issues of artificial gravity, protection from cosmic radiation, and building a space ark. And the third is to build an effective economic system of Asgardia. Leon Shpilsky, who is present here, is Asgardia's Minister of Finance. Will address the third component, our economic system. Thank you for your attention, and now the word goes to Mr. Shpilsky. Thank you.
Thanks. You see, so a very different point of view also in our discussion. It's important to have, from an intellectual point of view, also different inputs on that. Please, Leon.
Yes, so in fact, a very different point of view. Hi, I'm Leon Shpilsky. I'm Minister of Finance of Asgardia, the first space nation. And it's a pleasure for me to be here today, and thank you all for coming. As Minister of Finance, I would try to limit my discussion to economics and financial aspect of our nation. But of course, I realize that a lot of people are interested in many other aspects. But today, at least my points are going to be limited to economics and finances. Our nation is the only nation in the world that I know of that is based on networking of people who are conducting or trying to conduct business exclusively in digital economy. It is, in a sense, a society of people who are interested in space, but who at the same time realize that they live here on Earth and need to create a new environment for conducting of commercial transactions and business in general. Realizing that our parliament actually, in the beginning of this year, enacted the Act of National Currency and Basic Economic Principles of Asgardia as a nation. And the basic principles are that we will have our own currency. It's going to be called solar. This currency will be supplied only through the will of citizens of Asgardia, so government is not going to control supply of money. Also, most profits from dividends that our government will receive from its commercial activities and its subsidiary companies will be distributed to citizens of Asgardia. And the emissions of currency will be based strictly on market demand. So there will not be any currency issued unless it is required for actual commercial transactions. Second decree that our parliament passed on economic front was 2019 budget. So as a real nation, we have a real budget. On the revenue side, we're going to be collecting revenue from citizenship fees of €100 per year. We will also implement a tax system which will tax revenues of businesses and business transactions registered in Asgardia, but we will never double tax profits. So if a company is registered in Asgardia but pays tax somewhere else, we will not tax the same profit. We will also collect some commissions on transactions conducted business transactions conducted in Asgardia, and also on exchanges of currency of our solars into convertible currencies, which we have now 12, which were also democratically selected by our citizens. So it's the most popular currencies among our citizens that will be exchangeable into solars and vice versa. A major portion of our revenue is going to come from global infrastructural projects that we will be involved in, and those projects will be mostly conducted by a company called Asgardia AG, which is going to be the main commercial and investment vehicle of our government, and I will talk about Asgardia AG a little bit later. Now, on the expenditure side of our budget, just a few comments. I would like to underscore that as a digital country, we will not need to spend a lot of money on infrastructure such as roads, military, defense, agricultural complexes, security of our borders, and so that should allow us to invest most of our revenues into creation of digital economy and the economy that is exclusively focused on development of space industry and on exploration of space. Now, a few words about Asgardia AG, and I'd like to move to. So this is the structure of our commercial side. Asgardia AG is in the middle, and the first 7 million citizens of Asgardia as a nation will be allowed, they will be called first wave, and they will be allowed to pay 1,000 euro for the issuance of citizenship certificate, which will in itself be a tradable financial instrument. And also they will receive a passport for this fee. But it will also allow the nation to collect 7 billion euros into its coffers, which it will spend on buying shares of Asgardia AG. Asgardia AG is a company that is based in Vienna. It is a regular corporation, and so we plan to capitalize it with 15 billion euros, and it will be done through issuance of common shares with planned nominal value of 1,000 euro per share. So the first 7 million citizens of Asgardia will be called privileged level number 2 shareholders of Asgardia AG, because they will receive dividends from Asgardia AG through their holding that they will hold through the nation, not directly. And 1 million of those citizens will be privileged number 1 shareholders in AG, because they will also receive options to buy shares of Asgardia AG directly for 1,000 euro a share, and therefore they will receive, in addition to receiving dividends through Asgardia as a nation, they will also receive dividends from Asgardia AG directly. Now, we will also have investors. There will be 7 major investors. Minimum ticket will be 1 billion euros per ticket. Those investors could invest as individuals or as groups, and they will, of course, receive common shares. This will be the highest level of ownership in Asgardia AG. And in addition to common shares, they will also receive, each one of them or their representatives, a seat on Supreme Space Council, where, in addition to those investors, the head of nation will be leading this Supreme Space Council, and also the heads of all of our branches of government will be present there.
Leon, last point.
Last point, next slide. Just an example of global infrastructure project of Asgardia AG that I was talking about. We have plans to launch 10,000 satellites into space within 3 to 5 years. The main purpose of these satellites would be to establish a global communication network which will work without using radio frequencies on Earth, and that is based strictly on IP that belongs to our nation, and which allows transmission of data, video and voice communication through optical channels. So that's an example of a big.
So now you know a little bit more about Asgardia. Very direct question: are you going to apply for to become member of WTO?
In our our constitution states that we are to work with every international organization on earth. So it is our intent to actually work very closely with WTO, United Nations, and all other organizations. So we realize that we're still here, and so this is important for us. But individual agencies will be subject to additional discussions by our parliament and government.
Very important goals. Thank you. Let us just go a little bit ahead. I know that also one of our panelists has to leave later. Actually, I think that it's important just to understand WTO, we can say that in this structure is still young, like 25 years old, and okay, talking about general agreement on tariffs and trade, we have to go a little bit back in the history. But we are talking about not a very old story. So that we have the impression that something is not functioning, that there is maybe WTO has to be updated. And I think that the most important experience is a recent one, the experience of Kazakhstan. Because Kazakhstan is member of WTO since 2015, and Zhanar, you played a really central role in the accession process, and as I was saying before, you really lived this experience personally. So, what are you seeing? Is today WTO in line with your expectation as a country?
Good question. You know, I just mentioned that we became independent in 1991, and by the time when we entered the WTO, when our accession has been finalized, we were 24 years old as a state, and 19 or 20 years of which we spent on the accession to the WTO. So I think that for the size of the economy of 18.5 million people, it's quite a very lengthy period. You know, I can understand when Chinese experience was lengthy and complicated. I can also understand when Russia's experience was lengthy, but our experience was not less lengthy and not less complicated. And there were several factors. And of course, when we, what does that mean, that we had such a lengthy and complicated process? On the surface, it means that it was a too long negotiations. Maybe bureaucrats like traveling abroad, like to Brussels, to Washington. I spent of my professional life 13 years on the accession to the WTO. It was non-stop travel and non-stop negotiations. But at the same time, I think that if you look deeper at the reasons, then we have used this period for very serious structural reforms of our economy. Because, you know, accession to the WTO, it's not an end goal itself. It wasn't for the sake of the accession, you know, to become like 164th member of the WTO. What does that mean? But what was most important were the reforms in our economic policy, trade policy, and investment policy. And the major priority for Kazakhstan is the diversification of the economy, you know, and reduction on the dependence of our economic growth on exports of, as I have mentioned, commodities. And it was quite a challenging question for us, and it was a challenge for the government. So why we believe that WTO accession was helpful to our diversification process. When I used to travel and making this type of presentations to the audience in the course of the accession process, I used to say that 70% of the foreign direct, between 70 and 80% of FDI which has been attracted by Kazakhstan, which is highest per capita in the among the former Soviet republics, and represent almost 70% of the FDI attracted by Central Asian states, we have attracted $265 billion of foreign direct investments into Kazakhstan's economy. So, you know, the major bulk goes to oil, gas, and mining sectors. And the challenge was how to make attractive other sectors, processing, manufacturing, agriculture processing, as well as services sector. So just statistics. You know, since we joined the WTO, in the course of the last 3 years, we have attracted $42 billion in foreign direct investments, of which 14 billion, or almost 30%, went to services sector. Why? Because in the course of the accession to the WTO, we have made very strong commitments on liberalization of the services sector. It was stage liberalization for financial services sector. It was upon the accession liberalization for telecommunications sector. We had 49% foreign investment cap. We have liberalized that. And we also had exclusive monopoly rights of Telecom company, which we have also liberalized and removed in the course of the accession process. And we have also undertaken very strong commitments for foreign investors into construction services, into transportation services. These are the most lucrative parts of the services sector. And now we can say that 1/3 of FDI, since Kazakhstan has entered to the WTO, goes to the services sector. And in total, 55% of FDI goes now outside mining and outside and oil and gas sector. Yes, there are problems. Yes, there are reforms, discussions of the WTO, but I think that WTO, it's, as it has been mentioned, it's a contract. And every country has its own contract. There are level playing field, the mandatory requirements which every country should fulfill, and there are also certain commitments which are undertaken by acceding countries. And these commitments, they should be in line with the long-term national economic growth interests. So I think that if you do that so carefully, and you know, don't worry if the process is lengthy, as long as it's beneficiary to the country's economic growth, then WTO will be corresponding to your national economic interests. And I believe that from your participation, your country's participation, your economy's participation, also multilateral trading system will be benefiting and gaining. Thank you. I would like to be positive because we are latecomers, we have made very strong commitments, and now within the WTO, we are also Kazakhstan is leading the global services special session, services negotiations. It's not also coincidence because we have made strong commitments on services. We are interested in a level playing field. So I believe that, you know, we have to look forward, and WTO, it's not an institution separate. It's very much member-driven. It very much depends on the will of the members, and members now should work on how to reform the WTO in order to make its regulatory framework more correspondent to current day realities. Thank you.
Thanks, Zhanar. I think it was very important to have this really your as testimonial. You're talking about a real experience that you lived in the last 2 decades. I think it's important also to give some positive ideas about what is also WTO, because on newspapers read something, and after it's important to listen really to the opinion of governments, of experiences of new governments.
I just forgot to mention that despite being 3 years member of WTO, we will be hosting next ministerial meeting, 12th ministerial meeting in Astana next June. It has been shifted to June in order to give more time and more space for members to agree on the path for reforms for the future, as well as on outstanding initiatives and new initiatives. So we have to be positive. And we would like this Astana ministerial meeting to come up with the concrete decisions which will be determining the future shape of the organization.
Thank you. If you need a moderator, I am at disposal for. Okay, I know that you have to leave. You have Kazakh delegation today, so no worries when you have to leave. Thank you. And so talking also about a little bit positive, let's say, in this idea of positive outputs of WTO, I think that it's important to understanding also what's happening in the African continent, and for instance in those developing countries that really invested a lot in changing the system, in also trying to be in line with WTO and so on. What do you think?
Yeah, thank you. I think from developing countries' perspective, and more so from African countries' perspective, I think they see the WTO as a force for good. I will talk about two things. First, the WTO and the view of Africa, and then the continental free trade. They see that as a force for good because they think that if everybody was to live according to the rule, then local farmers in the interior part of Africa will be able to export their products, their produce to foreign countries. Because one of the questions I was asked once I visited Senegal by a juice producer was that because I was going for a training on WTO, he asked me that you keep on coming here for this training. Me as an exporter, a small holder exporter, how can I benefit? Because I produce the best juice here, orange and mango juice here. How can I export this mango juice to Europe or to the United States? And I was a bit gobsmacked because I actually thought that, well, these are the kind of farmers that the WTO in fact was set up to encourage so that they can benefit from the rules. But from an African countries, especially this kind of small farmers' perspective, it is very difficult to export this kind of value-added produce to the developed world now. So they feel that with the stalemate at the WTO, they are kind of caught in the middle because they want that the rules should be revised, should be clarified, so that it will be possible for them, for an exporter, to easily export without facing the non-tariff barriers, or in the context of what they call the technical barrier to trade, which is and the sanitary requirements, which is always a difficult thing for the African exporter. So they kind of feel like they are kind of being left somewhere in the cold. And looking at the WTO members' perspective, I think one of the things that I see is that many WTO members would want to give the so-called preferential treatment to most of these African countries. But I think their challenge is that we have this notion of developing countries, which is kind of a blanket phrase that many major WTO members are saying that, well, we must have to distinguish between these developing countries. So we must have to distinguish between these developing countries for us to be able to make the rules more favorable to these the countries like most of these developing countries in Africa. So that is the kind of the way that many African countries are at the moment thinking about the WTO, that the rules are there, they are in the system, but although they have benefited from the system, but they haven't benefited enough to be able to lift their citizens across the poverty line. Now, what has happened in the last years has been that maybe it has been like a blessing for some African countries because it has spurred them to enter into their continental negotiation. Because some of you may know that within Africa, the volume of trade among African countries is very little, less than 20%. So they don't trade among themselves. And we're talking of a population of 1.2 million people. And now they've realized that for us to be able to actually compete, we first need to trade among ourselves. And that is why last year in March, they signed the Continental Free Trade. The Continental Free Trade Agreement is a comprehensive agreement that liberalizes trade in goods and trade in services. It's a broad-based liberalization because they also have investment, intellectual property, and competition in picture. But now, what has happened is that liberalization on trade in goods and services have taken place. And they are hoping that they will start implementing the agreement once they have had the 22 ratification. In fact, the ratification, the quorum is so low that I think we're talking of the next few months, the continental free trade should enter into force. And many Africans are very hopeful because they feel that with this liberalization, they'll be able to trade among each other. And the small holder farmers, as the one that I mentioned earlier, will be able to not just sell within their own domestic territory, but also export to other African countries.
Yeah.
Jan, please.
Yeah, thanks. I want to come in on this. Really an important point. A lot of the work we do is with Africa and also other so-called developing regions. There are three obstacles to trade. One is the tariffs. That's what we spoke about initially. You have duties, no? Second one is what you refer to as the so-called NTMs, non-tariff measures. You want to export dry fruit or textiles or whatever from Rwanda to Europe, and you need a certificate that there are no pesticides in it, or there are no whatever, genetically modified or whatever, no child labor. All these are the non-tariff measures that are particularly important for exports from developing regions to the developed region. The third obstacle is what I spoke about earlier, the trade facilitation, the transport, the trade costs. These are particularly important for intra-regional trade. We have some studies there. So for the African free trade areas, and I would dare say also for whatever, Central Asian integration, for Central American integration, there it's the transport, the transit at the border where you need to collaborate. Now, how are these linked? If you want to, especially Africa you said 1.1, 1.2 billion people. It's an order of magnitude, same as China or India. What is the big difference? Within Africa, you have 108 bilateral borders. I counted them. You can go to a map, count 108. Within China, you have 0 bilateral borders. Within India, 0. So that is where you need the integration. You need to facilitate transit transport to have the regional value chain to build textile. Whatever you want to export, you want to export textiles from Uganda. You need maybe import inputs from neighboring Rwanda or Kenya or Tanzania, and then you have to overcome the NTMs. That's a bit the package, how I see it.
Yeah, I think the point is very important. I mean, to highlight what's happening also in different areas of the world. But what is the point of view of Dan? What is the point of view of companies? I mean, also talking about U.S. companies, about a little bit what's happening, about how WTO is updated or has to be changed.
Well, companies want smooth trade, and they want to be able to trade with everyone. So they want no barriers, no tariff barriers, no non-tariff barriers, and they want better logistics. By the time they get to the WTO level, there's a serious problem for them. They've tried to deal with that problem by going in a different direction, maybe trading with someone else, working it out from a business point of view. And I think the WTO is not a good solution for them, talking about overall companies. One disappointing thing is that, the United States is very litigious. We're getting to the point where people who want to fight with each other will file with the WTO as a strategy of negotiation with the other people. I've had 2 of those myself. I think that's not healthy. I don't think it's the role the WTO ought to be playing, helping private litigants beat up on each other. But by and large, I'd say most of American economy happens without regard to the WTO, just as it happens without regard to the government. The government sets policies. We all live with the policies. We don't like some of the policies. We try to change some of the policies, but by and large, we do business without regard to what those policies are.
Vladimir, very similar question to you, because expectation also, I think, from the Russian economy since 2012, when you became member of WTO, I think were to obtain benefits in terms of liberalization of trading activities, but now they are even under sanctions. So what is the feeling about WTO? What are the expectations in Russia about WTO?
The feeling is positive. I gave already the example of Russian agriculture. But Marco, I would like to come back to world trade, not to WTO. I'm not a specialist.
Please.
Excuse me. But if we talk about world trade, I think the forecasts are not so optimistic. But for every country or for our community, manhood is the question: how can we continue economical growth? And that's why I think the future, huge future projects will be realized in Eurasia. And as I mentioned, I believe this cooperation, and especially such programs like Chinese program, Silk Road, One Belt, One Road initiative, well known as that, and the cooperation between China by the realization of this program or initiative with the European Economic Union first, led by Russia as biggest country of this union. I hope also all the Caspian countries will just include, and I'm sure every foreign company, American, Japanese, and so on, may and should be involved in this huge future infrastructural projects like new railways, new highways, new pipelines in this space. And I think special role will play the Trans-Caspian region. That's why we are here. And yes, I think we just have to show the Europeans. You come from Switzerland.
Yeah.
Yes, you are not a member of the European Union. But if I talk to Germans, to French, they say we are Europeans. So they don't know where the border, where is the border between Europe and Asia, and they often don't realize that. As they say Europe, they mean a subcontinent of the continent Eurasia. So that's why I think we have just through the media, through politicians, we have to explain we are neighbors in this Eurasia, and we have to cooperate more actively. And maybe one more absolute concrete point. Recently, by all these trade conflicts, by problems by the WTO, we observe the instability of dollar. And this is a problem for our economies, especially in Russia. It's in China a problem. I know a great problem in Iran and so on. So I think if we establish new stock exchanges in one of the European big city or capital, it could help us. It could be oil stock exchange in euros. In euros. It could be a gas stock exchange. It could be ferro, metal or non-metal stock exchange, and gold stock exchange. And it could be just addition to other stock exchanges in the world. It could help us.
I think that what you just said is also in line also with the reason why we are here today talking about the what we call the Great Caspian area. The idea is also to really highlight the potential and the importance of this area. But let me go back just to some technicalities. Maybe same question, Daniel, to you. Also the point of view of companies. You're also advisor to companies, to multinationals on WTO, because I guess most of them are complaining and trying to understand what we have to do, origin of goods, tariff on that good. Or I remember just when we started talking about sanctions to Russian products or to European products. A lot of, I remember that very well, Italian companies wanted to come to Switzerland to export products from Switzerland to Russia, and because they thought that this could be a solution to do that, but unfortunately it was not, it's not. But I mean, there are some also issues for companies. What do you think about that?
So I think that the problem is, as I kind of mentioned earlier, that the negotiating machinery at the WTO is broken. And so we have had some negotiations, some basic clarifications, and some are very, very important and help business, like the trade facilitation agreement, so we can show that we can do this. But in many other areas where we're talking about market access, where can I do business in your country or not, there's too much of that going on where countries just block trade generally. And businesses kind of wonder, why do you not want? I mean, why do you not let me do business in your country? As
we're all friends.
We're all friends. Let's become friends by trading with each other more. And I think that's what Ambassador Aitzhanova was saying about going through a process that even though businesses don't really care, they shouldn't worry too much about the overall structure without the structure that you've built through a WTO accession, or we have in the rules through our contracts. You don't get the atmosphere built where businesses can do those things on their own. So I think the real question is, why have negotiations been blocked at the WTO since 1995 for market access? Why does everyone do things in regional settings, in bilateral trade agreements that you're talking about all your regions here on the panel where we all do so well, but we can't bring that back into Geneva because some country, one or two countries even, block it. And I think that the one example to show a bit of sunshine coming in on that, a good an optimistic angle, is e-commerce. But it has two angles. One is not good, and the other is good. The not good part is not all countries have signed up to it. In Africa, we have, I think, Nigeria and Kenya only, which is very disappointing that the countries that need it most are not participating. Kazakhstan is a supporter, going to support, signed up, and we can count on them, I'm sure, to be at the table, right? And so we have 70 or 80 countries who, at the end of this week in Davos, are going to announce a transition to real negotiations that affect real businesses, that establish real rights to do business, and it shows that there's a path forward. So it's optimistic, but why isn't everyone on board? And so Ambassador Aitzhanova in Kazakhstan will hopefully host the solution to that problem in Astana in 2020, and we're all looking forward to that. So to the extent businesses are watching that or not aware of that, and you're all affected by it, because electronic commerce and digital trade affects you whatever your business is, and so there are solutions being thought of, and if your government's not participating or not participating at the level that they should be, you really need to get involved and push the thing forward, because it only happens when you have a groundswell from the bottom up. And the top-down structure has been built, and the bottom-up grows from things like Davos and the things they do in the regions, and what leaders like Ambassador Aitzhanova does in all of her free time.
I think just going back to the WTO, to General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, let's do not go too much into details, but I think it's important to maybe to remember that a very important point is certainly multilateralism. Multilateralism, this was said when we talked about the situation in the African continent, and we also lived that Switzerland. That's why, Pietro, I'm asking you that about the importance of multilateralism. And at the same time, we see how Switzerland, as a small country, is very active, how certain area of this world are very active, but it's not happening really the same in other areas. Like, for example, talking about China, I would like also to understand a little bit what is the strategy of China, because it seems that China is not very active on regional trade agreements. But let's start from Switzerland. The point of view, very short, a couple of minutes.
Yes, thank you. A couple of words on the specifics of Switzerland. Of course, when you have such a pronounced outward orientation as Switzerland does, which means that your economy depends so heavily on exports, you do whatever you can. I think it's your duty as a government to do whatever you can to facilitate access to foreign markets for your products. I say products, but it also includes services, by the way. We tend to forget that. But for a country like Switzerland or the European Union or the United States, many services are actually very, very important as well. And so is access to foreign markets for services as well. And I mentioned three, we could mention many more, of course. Services are increasingly important for everybody. In the case of Switzerland, well, the multilateral system remains, of course, a priority, remains the best avenue to ensure that type of predictable, certain access to markets. But at the same way, again, to go back to what I think is the duty of a government, if that track doesn't really move forward, you explore other options, other alternatives. And that's where the free trade agreements or preferential trade agreements come into the picture. Switzerland has, I think, 30 trade agreements in force today with 40 different countries. Those agreements give preferential access to a market of roughly 2 billion potential consumers, and I don't want to say something here about probably 20 trillion of GDP. It's huge, it's important. And those markets are also growing on average at a faster pace than the markets with whom Switzerland does not have FTA. So it is very, very relevant. Now, yes, I think it's about how dependent you're on exports, of course, and it also depends on the size of your economy. If you're a medium, small size, and that applies to Switzerland, but to many other countries as well, you want to make sure that rules are set, are discussed, and that everybody abides to those rules, because you know that you cannot impose your will through force. And by force, I mean, of course, economic force, not violence. You know that very well. So you're probably more inclined to compromise, and we probably need to see a bit more of that at the WTO as well in order to move forward. Yes.
I think it's interesting, once again, just going back to what Dan said, what are the expectations from companies, I think it doesn't depend on the country you are based. It's like a very global point of view on what, as companies, we need to be active all around the world. And okay, China is today, for us, one of the most important players, generally speaking. And it seems that China is not that active also in developing new regional agreement and so on. What is the strategy? What there is behind that?
Do you mind if I ask questions to specify
yes.
what you were saying? When you refer to, what do you refer to as a regional agreement? Regional
agreement with other countries, with
bilateral,
other areas.
Bilateral
yes.
Agreement with the neighboring countries?
Yes, and multilateral as well, yes.
Uh-huh.
从他们角度来讲，觉得好像中国对这个国与国之间的这个多边的这双边的这个协议，好像不是特别热心，没有怎么在这方面怎么。
你是，我就打过4个的话，对。那么关于谈到这个 WTO 这个话题的话，我讲感触还是颇深的。我非常像刚才我们哈斯克坦大使说的，这个经过多年的努力才加入 WTO， 而中国也是一样。
I was listening with a lot of interest of what was being discussed just now by my fellow panelists, particularly with regards to the lengthy accession process of what Ambassador has mentioned for Kazakhstan. It was similar case for China.
当年中国为了加入 WTO 呢，也进行了一个艰苦的一个谈判，然后我们很多中年人谈成了老年人，年轻人谈成了中年人。
China has gone through a rather lengthy and almost painful process of acceding to WTO. By which the young government officials became mid-age officers, and mid-age officers became senior citizens.
那么既然是大家都这么难进入，我就想，那么这个 WTO 一定是个很好的，要不然大家干嘛要这么往里边去加入它呢？
But somehow there must be something interesting, something good out of this WTC. Otherwise, it cannot be explained that why people would endure or make certain effort to get into it.
所以是中国在2001年加入 WTO 之后啊，18年来的话，我认为中国还是一直这个履行了当时加入 WTO 的承诺，放开市场，大幅降低关税。
From my angle, I would say that since China joined WTO in 2001, China has mostly honored its commitment while entering the WTO mechanism. And also during this time, in the past 17 years, the country has gone through a tremendous progress. This has been highly beneficial for China.
首先说，中国是加入 WTO 的受益者，我想这里边也是 WTO 的初衷。大家都在想，加入 WTO 的目的是希望通过加入 WTO 之后，可以获得更多的一些便利，贸易的便利。
May I say that actually the fact that China might benefit from accessing WTO was the original design and common wish of all the member countries at the time.
那与此同时，中国也是对 WTO 的一个贡献者。
At the same time, China was not the only benefiting from accessing the WTO. It has also made its own contribution to the mechanism.
大家知道，中国是个巨大的消费市场。那么，2018年就是在昨天，中国刚刚公布最新的数据，我们的 GDP 是90万亿人民币，增长了6.6%。
As we speak, and as we know that China has become a tremendous marketplace for the world trading partners, the most recent figure for 2018, 18年最新的 was the most figure for 2018. GDP has just been released and was actually 90 trillion renminbi. It's about 15 trillion USD. The 2018 figure for Chinese GDP.
中国是14亿人口的大国，14亿人已经到了14亿人了。那么我们在中国常讲，任何一个数字，很小的数字乘以14亿的话，它都会变成很大的一个数字。
As a nation of 1.4 billion residents, it has just an impressive multiplying impact. So whatever you refer to as you talk about as a phenomenon or factor, just multiply 1.4 billion and you get into a big number.
同样的道理，任何一个困难，把它除以14亿的时候，都变成很小的一个数字了。
And at the same time, let's say that for any given obstacles, divide it by 1.4 billion, it becomes a much more achievable objective to overcome it.
所以我说，这个巨大的市场，我们中国现在要开始搞进口博览会。2018年，习主席亲自倡议搞进口博览会，这个对全球来说的话，是一个巨大的一个商机。
So as we know that China has started the annual import exposition as presided by President Xi himself last year, this represents a tremendous opportunity for the world trading partners.
Thank you.
Not that easy, but I will try now to get to a conclusion. I mean, probably we could stay up to tomorrow morning talking about that, and I'm sure that the opinion, still technical and non-technical, general opinion, really could go ahead for a lot of hours. But what is important for me now, maybe it's just asking you to give kind of final statements on how digitalization can support also world trading, not from a technical point of view, or also from a technical point of view, depending on what you would like to say. Maybe let's start from ladies, from Mrs. Ambassador, and then just go ahead and please.
Thank you. it has been mentioned by Daniel that one of the encouraging moments is that new initiative on e-commerce is gaining now a lot of support from WTO membership. And that ministerial statement, which is being discussed and being supported by members, WTO members, is about just starting the negotiations. It's not about the end outcome, but it's final outcome. But it's about starting the very technical, very difficult and complex from human and institutional capacity point of view, negotiations on e-commerce, because e-commerce is not only about trade, e-commerce is about all aspects of foreign economic activity, and it also concerns the broader digitalization issues. So we believe, as a landlocked country, Kazakhstan believes that digitalization of all trade-related services is only beneficiary and is going to reduce the cost of trade. Because we already see first results, and this year we have been very, to our advantage, very well rated by the World Bank Doing Business rating, because thanks to the digitalization of the customs services, of import, export and transit transactions. And I would like to give credit to the UNCTAD, with whom we have implemented this project. And we are still going to finalize that by e-government. And in a few years, we would like to have 100% of government or public services being digital in my country. And as I have mentioned, when it comes to trade, for landlocked country, which is remotely located from major export markets, it's very important for both imports, exports, as well as for transit. So, and I was going to announce this on Friday at the ministerial meeting, but I think that Kazakhstan is going to positively support this e-commerce negotiation.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. So, Daniel takes credit for this.
Daniel, now the word to you. Just very quick also.
I actually think that on the digital side, I think there's a problem of perception and substance and lots of difficulties to get through. But the most important thing is to have developing countries on board and lead and do it their way, and do it as a way that advances their interests as they define them, and not let the big internet companies who are all here in Davos and all, I mean, there's a lot to be said for digitization of customs and digitization of trade opportunities, and letting landlocked, not just Kazakhstan, but African countries and poor countries identify trading opportunities. Oops. Okay.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Start over.
Please.
Yeah. So I really think that the biggest challenge that we face in this space is just getting the countries on board that need it most. And I think the countries in Africa that are on board have a ambassadorial role to play in their regions. Kazakhstan has a role to play getting other countries on board. And the only thing I'd like, I know it will be a success in substance, but in participation, it will only be a success if we get more countries on board. But in that regard, I want to make one statement about the Caspian region and the countries that are not WTO members. There is no reason why they should not be participating and following and watching. They're all members of UNCTAD. They're all following these things as they need to be. So there's a lot of things that can be done by all the countries in this room and in all the regions to follow the opportunities and take advantage of the digital growth without being a member of the WTO, as we're kind of focusing on this panel. But that really shouldn't be the focus, because it's much broader than that.
You are all giving the word one to the other. You were talking about the African countries and digitalization.
Okay. I think it's a no-brainer, digitalization. I think definitely will help international trade. And since you asked me to talk about Africa, I think from an African perspective, I'm actually surprised that only these two countries have actually signed up to the e-commerce. Yeah, because I had a chat with some of the ambassadors there, and they were very enthusiastic when the agreement was first approved. So hopefully, Ambassador will help us here in 2020, pushing some of those African countries. Yeah.
We need more announcements for Friday.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, so that they can do that. But concretely, I think many African countries, and I think this will apply to other developing countries and least developed countries. I think they say there's an issue, a perceived issue of national security when they talk about this digitalization, because one of the things they are concerned about is where is the data being held? Who is holding the data? Where will it be saved? How can we access this data once it is there? Who get the right to this data? And then from a private individual perspective, of course, there's also the privacy issue there. So these are the kind of things that are in the mind of governments that have not yet signed up, because some of them, they don't yet trust the host of the data, and the digitalization to them is still something that they think is for the future. So I think it's just a matter of the private sector working with the government to make sure that most of their economy can be digitalized. And for a continent like Africa, I think digitalization will be very, very important. And I'm happy to also say that e-commerce is one of the chapter in the continental free trade. They haven't yet finished. They haven't yet actually finished the negotiation on that, but they have that in picture that they want to have an agreement on e-commerce. So hopefully by next year we should not be talking about two countries ratifying, but we should be talking about maybe 20 or 30.
Maybe by Astana Ministerial Conference.
Astana Ministerial Conference. We will join. Yeah. Okay.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you. Jan?
Yeah. Okay. Does this work? Yes, I'm not turning too much. 3 things. First, what's the Twitter hashtag for this event? Technological progress will never be as slow as today. Got it? Is it slow? No, it's not slow. But it will be even faster. So any policy you make, any regulation has to keep in mind the future technology. When we started the negotiations at the WTO, developing countries were nervous about internet publication. Yeah? It's a no-brainer these days. So my favorite article is 10.1, which just says, be as efficient as you can. All the other articles we will be compliant with in 5 to 10 years, but this one will still be relevant in 50 years. Point number 2, we sharing some ongoing recent research. Which are the measures, trade station measures, that are particularly important for e-commerce? So you see which measures are those that are implemented by those countries that also have more e-commerce readiness or more e-commerce. Single window, express carriers, and border agency cooperation. Makes sense, no? But I'm sharing with you, these are at least statistical correlation. Third point, a little sales pitch. Thank you for the thanks to UNCTAD. Not April's Fool's Day, but 1st of April until 5 April, UNCTAD e-commerce week in Geneva. 1,500 people will go into much more depth than we can do here.
Thank you. Also in this case, if you need a moderator.
Promotion.
Pietro.
Thank you.
Please.
Very, very briefly. I think it's natural, it's logical that the legislator is left to catch up with evolving realities, evolving and changing products, services, consumer habits. We mentioned e-commerce, of course, and e-commerce has already imposed itself as a way of consuming, as a way of purchasing. So it is natural, it's normal, I think. There is nothing wrong with that. It happens at domestic, at national level. Imagine at international level where a group of countries with different points of view, with different perceptions, with different economies, structures, are meant to discuss and come to an agreement. What I would like to say to conclude is that, however, as we have heard from several of the speakers here today, some concrete proposals are on the table, and there is absolutely no reason for no country in the world not to take an active part in those discussions and in those negotiations. Everybody, I think, can really win from these initiatives. I think I can leave it at that.
Vladimir, final statement for you.
Yes, thank you. Agree, digitalization will reduce the costs of trade. Then I would say Russia is on a good way. For example, creating together with the other partners Asgardia, or I could report Russian Google named with the name Yandex makes taxi services in Moscow or St. Petersburg function better as in Berlin or Paris. And finally, I would say it happened already. I mean, we communicate much easier, much more rapidly, much more better. And if you really exchange contracts, if you order anything and so on, we have progress, really progress, and I'm optimistic.
Dan, also, I had the occasion to have you also as a representative of the economy, of the companies, of the company work, so maybe also statement from this point of view.
Well, I'm biased because I'm in the digitalization business a little bit, but I would make a positive point and a negative point. Positive legislation is always way behind business. And the fact is we are already digitalized on the factory floor in logistics and shipping and ordering and everything you can think of. It needs to get more robust, but it's already there, and we're about to have 5G, which is going to allow machines to help each other without human intervention. It's going to be a really great thing. It's not truly digitalization, by the way. Much of what we're talking about is an analog device and not a digital device. But except for geeks, that doesn't really matter. We're talking about commerce and that sort of thing. I don't want to say negatives, but the offset to that is we're talking about business. But the fact is a huge proportion of the world's population doesn't have electricity. Without electricity, you're not going to have digitalization. You're not going to have that spread of economic activity from the bottom up. So we have to work on that too. In the United States, we're already working on that for small business. We've found a way in the internet to allow small business to compete directly with the Amazons of the world, and that's wonderful. Also, my personal view is we'll never really get there so long as we have companies or countries that inhibit the internet growth, that won't allow emails or text. I won't mention any names, but they're all over the place. We do that a little bit in the United States. Cut off browsing. We have a mood in the United States now to further inhibit that through legislation because people are worried about evils on the internet. But until there's absolutely free online access to everybody in the world, I don't think we'll really get to the point that we want to be. And for that one, I would make my last point, which is an exaggeration. Governments and WTO have to be the enablers, but they also have to get out of the way, because they are the inhibitors to full development of these kinds of systems. Throw me out.
Mr. Hao, also your final statement.
关于这个话题，我想我有3个观点，很简短。
I have three remarks with regards to this subject.
第一，我认为这个数字贸易是经济全球化和数字化的一个必然产物。
The digital trade seems the inevitable outcome of the digitalization of the world economy.
第二个呢，这个中国在这方面的这个发展已经有了很好的基础。2017年，中国的数字经济规模是27万亿人民币，27万亿人民币占 GDP 的32%。
China, secondly, China has made progress in this regard. And in 2017, about 32% of Chinese GDP could be considered as materialized digitally.
第三个观点呢是还是我那句话，在中国的巨大的市场空间，这个数字经济的发展一定会非常的迅速。我举个例子来说。
Certainly, one more time, thanks to the huge the size of Chinese market, the big progress was made fastly.
就是说，现在这个我们阿里巴巴的这个电商的双11，对，每年的双11，11月11号这一天的话，这个交易额是非常巨大的，都很难用数字来体现。
I'd like to share with you our experience in e-commerce. As we all know, the Alibaba company, and every year on 11th of November, it's the day of it's a shopping day or shopper's paradise day. That daily turnover on that single day is impressive.
第二个，接着呢，就是说，在中国现在是手机支付的这个已经变成一个非常普遍。我的女儿就是90后了嘛，她就说，他们这一代都已经没有钱包了，从来都没有人拿钱包，只是拿一个手机。
And in a related aspect, that I'd like to mention the tremendous development of mobile payment in China. My daughter, who was born after in the 90s, she's often saying that her generation no longer has a purse.
然后他们这个90年就我的小孩，他们这一代每天忙于的事情就是回家要去那个取那个快递的物流，然后呢要开始不好的都马上再换掉，就是这些孩子们每天做的事情是极大的刺激了中国的物流业的发展。
All they got is a phone, and what they're busy about all day long is collecting their expressly delivered merchandise and eventually returning them if unsatisfied.
包括我们现在去地铁、公交车，全都是刷手机。然后我们真的早上买早点去那个买那个早点也要用手机支付就可以了。
So today in the major cities of China, the everyday need from local transportation to purchasing your breakfast soup, everything mostly they are settled through mobile payment with your phone.
所以一句话就说的这个数字经济应该是未来的发展空间是非常巨大的。
Back to our subject, the digital economy is the future, and that is no question about it.
因为要结束了，所以说还是要这个抢着说一句话，就是这个参加里海这个州的话，我是非常感触非常深的。我想也有个约定，像大使一样，我明年还会再来。
Finally, please allow me to make one personal remark. It's where I'm deeply touched to be invited to participate in the Caspian Week this time. And as the ambassador has mentioned earlier, that I would like to come back next year.
So, in conclusion, I have, Leon, good news and bad news for you. Bad news is that as Swiss politician, I cannot become member of citizen of Asgardia. Maybe in future. The good news is that I can give you the final word for the conclusion and to give let's say a view of the future to conclude this very interesting panel.
All right, where shall I begin? This last discussion on digitalization, in fact, proves the reason why Asgardia exists. Because as everybody else is trying to solve digital issues, and as everybody else looks at digitalization as an additional layer to their economies, which is a problem because of all the past history, we as a nation are fundamentally based purely on digital economy and e-commerce. So, to your point, Don, absolutely, legislature is behind, but not in Asgardia. Yeah. Because as we are creating our digital economy, we are writing laws which will lead the way to bring digital economy, e-commerce, e-government to people that are citizens of Asgardia and businesses that are registered in Asgardia. And because we are not looking to confront societies on Earth, I think it is only befitting that today we're talking about the synergy of how countries on Earth deal with their future as digital economies, and our country, which is building a platform for the future generations in politics, in economy, in judicial systems, and of course in e-commerce and digital trade.
So, thank you. Thanks to all our panelists. Thanks to all of you for your attention.
Good to be with you.
Just for the panelists,
I would like
please,
to
please.
thank Marco Passalia on behalf of the speakers today's panel.
Thanks.
Thank you
Thanks.
for
My pleasure. My pleasure.
being an
Thank you.
excellent
Thank you.
moderator.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah.